This would be channel Flippin Juneteenth holiday. Just about 45 minutes long here. From about, 6:15 to 7 or something like that. Or 6 to 6:45.
With some higher gusts at times. But look at the high on Monday in Sioux Falls, just 73 degrees, so it's going to feel great out there. But very short-lived because we're back into the 80s Tuesday and 95 Wednesday and Thursday. A few showers and storms Thursday, but after that, staying in the mid to upper 80s to right around 90 degrees. In Aberdeen, 73 degrees on Monday. Tomorrow night and Monday night, lows in the 40s. And then, unfortunately, we're back up close to triple digits again by Wednesday, a high of 98. And then we will drop back down closer to 90 after Thursday. And finally, in Pierre, mid to upper 70s the next couple of days. And then 100 for a high on Wednesday. So, again, not much break from the heat. And unfortunately, after this first go-around of rain, maybe not any more rain until Thursday and maybe staying dry after that. Stay with us. Much more coming up after the break.
Attention! Of all time. Bottom first, no score, man on second for Dylan Addis, who ropes one to deep center field. That ball's gonna drop. That would bring home the first run of the game, West up 1-0. Later in the inning, now 3-0 Sioux Falls West, and they'll add on another as a throwing error was committed by Wazetta, trying to get the out at home. The lead grows to 4.
It's possible that some of them may render the vaccines that we have slightly less effective. Are they going to be completely ineffective? Probably not, but this is another reason why those who are unvaccinated should be vaccinated as soon as possible, and why we need to be developing therapeutics, because for the foreseeable future, we are going to have people who are going to get sick from COVID-19, and ideally we will have something like Tamiflu for influenza, where somebody can take an oral pill to prevent them from progressing to severe illness.
And the Biden administration has put forth money for the development of such a pill. That's a really good point. And all of this, of course, raises the question about children and vaccinating them. You have been recommending that researchers develop vaccines for children. But the New York Times cites data that from the CDC that COVID-19 is well below other causes of death in children like drowning, homicide, and vehicle accidents. So my question is, would it be better to focus on vaccinating children, or would those resources be better spent getting more people vaccinated around the world to stop the spread of COVID and variants?
I think we should be doing both of these things. It's not either or. And actually, some of these arguments put forward in this vein, I think are actually conflating the issue. Because yes, we absolutely need to be vaccinating the world, because as long as COVID is surging in other places, it's going to affect us here. And also there's a humanitarian reason for us to be sharing our vaccines as well. But if you were to allocate every single dose of vaccine for every child under the age of 18 to other places, we will still be vaccinating less than 1% of the global population. And so what we really need to be doing is scaling up manufacturing capacity for vaccines around the world, and at the same time, keeping in mind that there's a fallacy. I think so often we are comparing the severity of illness in children versus adults. But imagine if we had a new illness that within a year and a half has killed more than 400 kids, has led to tens of thousands of kids being hospitalized, thousands may be living with long-term consequences, and we can't even predict which children get ill and which don't. If we have that kind of illness, I think a lot of parents would be saying, I don't want my kids to get that. And so I do think it's important for us to be vaccinating our children, to be reducing the risk of something that's, yes, it is a low risk, but it's a low risk of something potentially terrible. We want to, if we can cut that to essentially zero with a safe and effective vaccine, that is really important.
I want to look at the big picture here in the U.S. The number of COVID cases in the United States has been falling rapidly as more Americans get vaccinated. This graphic shows the number of new cases each day since the start of the pandemic. A closer look at the past couple of months shows that the number of cases per day is now below 10,000. Dr. Anthony Fauci cited that number as a bit of a milestone for ending COVID restrictions when he spoke with our Jake Tapper back in March. Take a listen.
I would like to see, as we get the level of virus in the community to a very low level, well below the 60 to 70,000 new infections, somewhere, I'll just pick a number, even though, there's not a good model there yet, but I would say less than 10,000 and maybe even considerably less than that.
So, given the numbers, at what point...
Open on 41st Street, right in front of Costco. shot we've seen hit the flag.
4 South Dakota teams enter the final day unbeaten in their pools, including Harrisburg, who played perhaps the game of the day and tournament this morning against Shakopee. Pitchers duel. North Carolina-bound Will Simmons had a pitch count, only worked 3 innings, yet he struck out 7 of the 10 guys he faced.
Of open borders. We're spending trillions of dollars we don't have. And let's take a look with Dr. Fauci and what we're finding on gain of function, but even from my standpoint, even worse, the suppression of information on early treatment of cheap generic drugs like ivermectin and hydroxychloroquine. Had we been doing that, literally tens of thousands of American lives might have been saved, but the media suppressed, they vilified doctors that had the courage to treat patients. So, no, this is...
Plus, learning on the job is an understatement for doctors who began their careers in the midst of a pandemic. You'll meet one of them ahead on American Voices.
If you enjoy weight...
What were my mother and father saying about the black school if they would send me to the white school? Now, my 2 older brothers remained in the black school, so they weren't making a comment about the school, that there was any problem with the school. They thought that they were doing something, and they kind of backed off from this in later years. But everything points to them thinking of being idealistic, thinking that this was part of the new world, and that I was going to be a part of that new world and help making that new world. So I don't think it was not about the quality of Washington School. It was about what they thought would be the future of the country.
Yeah. I would love for you to read a passage from the book. We talked about this just before we started our formal interview. Okay. And this takes us back to that time when you were 6 years old and you were integrating first grade at that school. So if you wouldn't mind reading that passage, it'll give our audience a flavor for the book in your own voice.
There was the oddity of being on display. Periodically, small groups of visitors, educators I assume, would show up and stand in the doorway of the classroom to observe how things were going. A black child in a room with maybe 25 other white students. Not to take anything away from the teachers and administrators at Anderson, but I did make things easy for them. First, and perhaps most important of all, there was for a time only me. One black child was not exactly an invasion. The degree of racial tolerance among whites has always been about numbers. Also, I was a good student right off the bat. In those days, when people cared less about making children feel bad, I was a bluebird, the group of the best readers. There was no attempt to hide what was going on from the slower reading birds. We got letter grades in our subjects, and the local newspaper printed the names of kids who were on the honor roll, and my name appeared there. My great-great-aunt, the one who would not stay overnight in Conroe, who lived in Houston and was also quite extravagant, bought boxes and boxes of dresses, tights, blouses, skirts, and hats from the most upscale department store in the city at the time, SIOUX. I remember opening them with my mother and being overwhelmed at the number and range of choices. I could go a long time without repeating an outfit. What it must have meant for my aunt, born on a farm into the even more racially repressive and violent society Texas was at the end of the 19th century, to be present at this moment, when one of her young relatives was about to embark upon an adventure in this brave new world. Making sure I was dressed to the nines was her contribution to the civil rights movement.
Thank you so much. I think that gives us a flavor of the time, and I just thought that was such a lovely story about what your great-great-aunt did for you and her contribution for such a momentous occasion.
Or you can win, including a free Lee Brice concert for your town. Free! No.
Like this. Why would you?
Not quite enough.
Shipping nationwide and returns right from the doorstep.
Are the heroes in your family?
Specific to you. Ready?
Is that we think it's important. We think where the balance sheet's concerned.
No.
special domain in the world. If black people had the same rights as white people, then what did it mean to be white? And what was the benefit of being white if you did not have people below you? And I'm not the first person to say this, but people have observed over the years that the South, the upper classes, wealthy people, the powerful people in the South, sort of stifled class resentment by, talking race, essentially, by telling poor white people, you may be poor, you may not have a future, but at least you're not black. And that was something that they held on to, and it prevented, in many cases, solidarity among people who had interests that were quite similar, as a matter of fact. So once you began to see black people getting equal rights, white people felt that some white people felt that they were losing ground just by virtue of us having rights. Whether we did anything affirmatively to them or not, it took away this notion of the privilege of whiteness. And black people felt a loss because, as I mentioned about Booker T. Washington, they lost their school. They lost their teachers because they took most of the black teachers out of the classroom. My mother remained in the classroom, but lots of other teachers were taken out of the classroom, and they lost that special bond that they had with between teachers and students. I mean, both people felt that they knew something was changing. They understood that change was coming, but I think both groups felt that that something was lost in this process.
Yeah, I could talk to you all evening about that period in your life.
Short of the cream, 80.
Hi guys, you're ready. Anyone who wants to win money should.
And it's meant to create a broad sense that we want inflation to average 2% over time.
That they believe that the election and the White House were rightfully theirs. So I'm not surprised that they are now just creating their own narrative. But we have to be clear here. It's not like the Republicans have abandoned this narrative. They fully embraced it at this stage because fundamentally it is fundamentally about violence at this stage. You cannot separate the big lie from violence or the threat of violence. That is the only thing that animates what is going on now. And until we start calling it exactly what it is, which is this is a violent movement, not about the First Amendment, not about politics, not about partisanship, we will not really grasp how close we came to losing so much on January 6th.
Of course, a big lie led to the insurrection. The FBI has identified at least 20 Q adherents in that. But now here we are so many months after that. If you would put in perspective how significant this threat is.
Yeah. So I want to start with the good news because it's always good to start with good news. There's over 400 criminal cases going on right now, and FBI Director Wray has promised a couple hundred more. Why is that significant? Well, one is punishment is important. You punish people for doing something like this. The other is it serves as a narrative for future recruits that we're not messing around anymore. So, because as a counterterrorism person, I worry about recruitment. And so these groups are getting eviscerated. They are turning on each other. They are telling on each other. They can't raise money. They've been isolated in a way that Donald Trump did the opposite. He, of course, nurtured them. So that is the good news. And you're seeing that in the social media. You're seeing that in the way they're able to raise funds. The bad news is one is it only takes one person, right? And to mobilize towards violence. And that mobilization is being nurtured by Fox News, by Congress people who will not denounce the big lie, by just the atmospherics of much of the GOP at this stage. So I just keep coming back to violence or the threat of violence because that's really their strategy right now, whether you look at what's happening with trying to take away voting rights or the threat of violence against certain Congress people or just the way they talk. I mean, it's just filled with this sense of righteous violence that one does not talk like that in a democracy.
So then how do people who never even went inside the building are still being charged? So it was not an armed insurrection. No one had guns. They had no intention of using them to assassinate Mike Pence or Nancy Pelosi or any of the other ridiculous claims that we've heard.
Well, if they had, you would think that the Attorney General of the United States would be issuing press statements saying so. Do we know how many of these individuals were Klansmen or neo-Nazis? Because the rhetoric now coming out of Joe Biden, who would know one because he was a segregationist early in his Senate career, is about white supremacy. The whole nation is damnable because it's a white supremacist dominated nation, and here's an example of it. And so they use the language to confuse the American people. Are we talking about Klansmen and neo-Nazis and white separatists? Are we talking about Americans? And so my question is, do we know how many of these individuals were neo-Nazis or Klansmen? Because I looked and I couldn't find any information on it.
None that I've seen. I think you saw one guy early on with a Camp Auschwitz t-shirt, and they used that, the media's evidence that these were neo-Nazis. But no, I've seen no racist language in any of the court documents, certainly nothing to support the idea that these are white supremacists or domestic violent extremists, as our Director of National Intelligence refers to them.
You talk of this t-shirt. I guess they haven't been listening to Omar, Tlaib, or AOC, or any of the others who make the most outrageous anti-Semitic statements from the floor of the House of Representatives. I want to continue with...
Leave your eyes.
Big businesses.
To sort of hold that tension between remembering an oppressive history and taking pride in the place that they call home.
Well, I mean, it comes to me through my family. And, you know, I end the book talking about the fact, these were my formative, Texas is where my formative associations were made. And I loved the state through the experiences that I had there with my mother and my father and my brothers and my friends growing up and becoming who I am in this spot. And, you know, being fortunate to have, you know, parents who loved me and an extended family whom I loved and were supportive of me in this place. We made a world for ourselves in this place, and that is sort of the basis of how I view Texas as a whole. I like the idea of the wide open spaces. I like the idea of the spirit. I've written that, you know, I feel freest when I'm on a highway riding in Texas, playing the music really loud. I like the sense of the outsizeness of it, but it comes through family, and it comes through experiences, and it comes through a hard-won, you know, hard-fought battle for equality among that my great-grandfather, I found my great-great-grandfather's voter registration on a list from 1867. This is a participation, a will to participate and to be a part, thwarted in many ways, but the will was there, and that's the thing that sustains me in thinking about the state.
Yeah. Well, since you mentioned family, we'll start with this question from Bonnie, who
started to work in a New York hospital. What were those first few months of the pandemic like for you?
Yeah, so I think a lot of us actually who graduated during the pandemic, we came in kind of at the height of at least New York City's first wave. And it was very scary. Just being an intern itself is scary, despite not even being in a pandemic. So yeah, it was scary, but I had a lot of support staff, nurses, everything to help me along the way. So it was really nice to be in that supportive environment during this time.
Emma, one of the reasons I found your book so compelling is that we know what we have lived through in the short term, but there are so many long-term questions about the way that COVID is going to change us as a society. What stood out most for you in your conversations with these young doctors?
Thank you so much for having both of us on. It's a treat to be here. I think one of the greatest takeaways I had from my reporting on the book was the idea that courage doesn't always look exactly like we think it's going to look like. I think when I started out the reporting, I anticipated that the greatest source of fear for a lot of the doctors I was following would be the sense that they themselves might fall sick.
And that was certainly a concern. But I think even deeper was the worry that they wouldn't always be able to do the life-saving work that they've been trained to do. There was one young doctor I followed in Life on the Line who admitted his first patient on his first day, and within hours that patient passed away. And the first ever medical note he signed as a doctor was a certificate of death. And that's not something that any doctor intends to do. These are people like Gabriella who are trained to do life-saving work, healing work, and in some cases in the midst of the COVID crisis, that wasn't possible. And I think following these young doctors who had the courage to do the work, even when they weren't able to save people's lives, and even when there was so little known about the disease, that was an incredibly inspiring story for me to follow and to be able to share with the readers.
Dr. Lowe, do you have a sense yet of how this is going to change your approach to the work?
I think it already has changed my approach to the work, right? Coming into a pandemic like this, you just have to change the way that you care for patients. You know, in medical school, before the pandemic, we were taught spend as much time with families as possible and make it really a patient-centered approach to medicine. In this sort of pandemic, in this environment, we really had to figure out ways to still do that, but through virtual means. And also without spending so much time with the patient that you would put yourself at risk for getting sick. So I think it's actually going to change a lot of the world of medicine, let alone my approach as well.
Emma, the faces of deadly weapon if it was used on January 6th, but not if it was used repeatedly by Antifa thugs. Obviously, destroying federal property is not that big of a deal when it's in Portland, because as Merrick Garland said, that happened at night, not during the day like the Capitol protesters. So,
And a quarter of the U.S. is in exceptional drought. Here's just one example. California's Lake Oroville, the state's second largest reservoir, is still seeing its water levels falling so low, it's expected the hydroelectric power plant will be forced to shut down for the first time in its history. And summer is just getting started here, folks. CNN's Camila Bernal is in Santa Monica, California. So Camila, heat and harsh conditions are, of course, nothing new to people in that part of the country. But what is making it so much worse right now?
Hey Pam, so what's making this situation worse is that year over year, California and many other states are getting less and less water. And yes, many people are out here at the beach today. They're cooling off because, of course, this is an area where temperatures are a little bit lower in comparison to other parts of the state where you're seeing 100+ degree temperatures. But it doesn't mean the problem goes away. All week long, officials here in the state of California telling people to conserve both water and energy. I spoke to Professor Steve Ladoci. He is with Cal State Los Angeles about what he tells people who don't believe that these efforts are necessary. Take a listen to what he said.
They should be thinking a lot about water, energy, and health. Water is finite. So when they turn on the tap, it's no problem. There's the water. But where's it coming from? It's not coming from Los Angeles. It's coming from the Colorado River, which is at its lowest amounts ever.
Now, we also spoke to Californians about whether or not they're making these changes, if they're trying to conserve water and energy. Some say, yes, they're making some adjustments, while others simply say it is too hot.
I open my windows, even though I have air conditioning, I open my windows at nighttime. Well, I have to have my AC. So, I don't know what to say about that, because I have to have my AC all the time.
And this is just the beginning. Everyone that I spoke to telling
has this order. He could have, I mean, there were other stuff to do, but he did that and put it out. And there's some questions about how it was announced. Some people say that he stood on a balcony and announced it. Other people say that his troops went through the city of Galveston and told people. It was probably both, could have been both. But he thought it was an important thing to do to sort of establish that this was going to be a new society.
Susan asks, can you speak to the issue of reparations?
Speak to the issue of reparations. I think the issue, well, it's a moral issue, and there's a moral right to this idea. I personally think, as a lawyer, this is the lawyer in me, that if I were doing this, I would start in the 20th century I would start with activities by the government, redlining for housing, failing to protect black homeowners that has resulted in disparate a sort of a gap in the wealth between blacks and whites. Start with people who are alive, who are still alive, who suffered wrongs after the passage of the 14th Amendment and clearly illegal activities and violations of the Constitution. I would start with that kind of reparations. Reparations for slavery are a sore point, and not to say, again, as I said, there's a moral right to it, but me being the lawyer and being pragmatic, I would start with the 20th century violations of civil rights and of the Constitution among plaintiffs for whom we have standing. That is to say, people who can point specifically to how they've been injured. And I would start there. And then maybe we could work our way back to it. I would not start with slavery. I would start with 20th century violations of the Constitution.
Speaking of working our way back, Krista has a question that says, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about the lasting impacts of slavery?
Well, the biggest misconception is, I think, is that they're not there, that the impacts are not there. I mean, Chief Justice Roberts, in voting rights case in Shelby County, basically said that the South has changed. All of this is over, essentially, and how wrong he was. The biggest misconception is that you can walk out of a couple of centuries of a society, of a particular attitudes, a particular culture, and then have it done. I mean, it's really not until 1965, with the Voting Rights Act, that we have what could be considered a legally equal, free society. That's not a long time at all. This has been a short amount of time that we've been doing this. And as we can see from the things that are happening today, it's happening in fits and starts, right? I mean, it's 2 steps forward, 3 steps back. So I think the big misconception is that you can just cut this stuff off. And
for over 145 years, more
and may stop treatment. Upper respiratory tract infection and headache may.
A breakthrough eczema treatment.
My name? Forget though, and I think even though, you know, in our four.
Explain it? No, I actually can't. But no, I don't know what that's about. You know, that's a story that I did not hear growing up. The first time I heard about this as something that was supposed to be about race and Texas history was in the 90s when I came back to visit with my kids. Yellow Rose of Texas is a song that's pretty, if you look at the original lyrics, is pretty obviously about a black woman, a mixed race black woman, a yellow girl. And there's a yellow girl in Texas. They changed it to Rose. There was another lyric that talked about Rose, but to remove the racial part of it, they made it into the Yellow Rose of Texas as through all of the lyrics. And I knew the song, obviously, and thought it was sort of an interesting song, but it was a minstrel kind of show about a black woman. But it has a black man in dialect singing about this yellow gal in Texas that he's going to see. And now there was a story that arose that this grew out of the story of Emily West, who was a woman who lived who was from New York, who moved down to Texas as a servant with a white man, not as a slave. She wasn't enslaved. And the story, I don't want to use the word romantic story, but the story is that she and Santa Anna, when we were about to go into battle, she occupied Santa Anna, and he wasn't ready for the battle. He wasn't ready for battle, and so she has been sort of spun as a Texas heroine in a way. But the real Emily West was taken, apparently the evidence indicates she was taken hostage by the Mexican army. But the notion that she had some kind of affair with Santa Anna, much less that she did it, some people say, the legend is, at the behest of Sam Houston himself, to occupy Santa Ana, so he would be distracted from battle. That is apparently apocryphal story, but I think it's fascinating. And I asked, what work is this doing? And this is an example of trying to bring African Americans into the story of Texas and the Texas Republic. But of course, it's not a great fit because the Republic did not allow Black people to immigrate there. And it was a republic that supported slavery. So you got to wonder, why would she have wanted to be an agent for Sam Houston to bring about the Texas Republic? But in a twisted, strange kind of way, it's a sign of wanting to make Black people a part of the sort of grand mythology of Texas. And it's somewhat misplaced, but I understand the impetus for it.
It's like
Nancy Pelosi wasn't prepared. What Nancy Pelosi did or didn't do, despite the fact that the President of the United States was prepared to provide 10,000 National Guardsmen, they knew there was going to be a big crowd there. Is she in part trying to cover her tracks by pointing the finger in every other direction, do you think?
I think so. There were so many missteps that day, too, whether they were intentional or accidental. I know you saw the Senate report that came out this week, which was highly critical of the U.S. Capitol Police and their lack of preparedness for that day. Now, was it accidental? Was it intentional? Nancy Pelosi and the Democrats are ready to fork over another $2 billion in funding, a big chunk of that to prevent anything like this from happening again. A big chunk of that is slated to go to the U.S. Capitol Police for overtime pay, hazard pay, $4.4 million to put together to establish a wellness and trauma center.
Wait a minute. I thought we were defunding the police everywhere else in the country. So in Washington, D.C., we're going to massively increase their budget. But do we know exactly what did Nancy Pelosi do, and when did she do it? In other words, 24 hours before, 48 hours before. She's the king, or the queen, if you will, of the Capitol building. She's the Speaker of the House. McConnell, too. He's the Republican leader. We have no idea, really, what either of these two did, particularly Pelosi as the Speaker of the House, to prepare this building. And now, she had the National Guard there for months. Now, as you say, she wants to massively increase spending on law enforcement, although no other city should. Don't we have a right to know exactly what Nancy Pelosi did?
We do, but we never will know, unfortunately. As you know, we'll never get to the bottom of it. But another question, too, Mark, is why do they keep lying about what happened that day? If the events of January 6th were the worst attack on our democracy since the Civil War, as Joe Biden says, or comparable to 9/11, Oklahoma City bombing, like Merrick Garland has said, why do they have to keep lying? Why do they have to lie that 5 people, or 7 people, as they said in the Senate report, were killed as a result of what happened that day? They've lied repeatedly about Brian Sicknick. The U.S. Capitol Police, they're lying to this day, still insisting that he was killed in the line of duty when we know that he wasn't. But 2 men still rot in this D.C. deplorable jail in order to keep that narrative alive, that Trump insurrectionists murdered a cop and then resulted in the suicides of 2 other cops afterwards, and that these other people died because of what happened that day, when the only person who was killed really was Ashley Babbitt, and we still don't know the identity of the officer who did that. So why do they have to keep lying? Why do they have to conceal video evidence? Why are they lying in court about what happened? I mean, I've listened to judges and I've listened to prosecutors say that 5 people were killed, including a police officer. So they just keep inflating what happened that day, all for political purposes, to keep political prisoners in jail and act as a threat and intimidation and bully to millions of Trump supporters, people on the right, that you better watch your step or else you're going to pay a price.
And the media could care less. The media don't demand to see what's going on in person.
Picky, and we started noticing some allergy symptoms. We heard about the farmer's dog.
Heart disease, infection, or past heart rhythm problem.
Heart, there's a lot ever at this point. And if I know teachers are under a lot of pressure to teach the tests and in certain ways, but to the extent that they have any freedom at all, there's a lot of material out there for this, because there's a hunger for it.
Brian asks, how can Juneteenth be appropriately celebrated and remembered by white people today?
Barbecue, firecrackers,
red soda water.
Red soda water. No, I mean, the same way black people do. The same way too. It's, as I said, it's about paying respects to people who went through a lot and recognizing their joy, understanding that there's still a long way to go, and maybe committing yourself in whatever way you can to be part of that process of making things better in whatever way you can. So we're human beings. We celebrate the way human beings do things. We eat, we get together with our family, we have fun, and it's, as I said, this is a July 4th type thing, but now it's for black and white.
Yeah. Ronnie asks, will the book be available in
How's going? Unexpected rage, hot flashes,
This past year has felt like a long
Reactions like low blood pressure, trouble breathing,
job sites and found people with the
Let's go. To trail off 30, 31 years old. And I think
not genetics or meteorology.
Go with us and find millions of flexible options, all in our app. Expedia. It matters who you travel.
Woman, and I had to pay $50 fine.
It's Saturday, Juneteenth. Happy Juneteenth, federal holiday, yay.